It's our purpose to bring to bear the principle of common sense and rational discussion to the issues of our day. America was created at a time of great turmoil, tremendous disagreements, anger, hatred. There was a book written in 1776 that guided much of the discipline of thinking that brought us to the discovery of our freedoms, of our God-given freedoms. It was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, written in 1776, one of the first American bestsellers, in which Thomas Paine explained by rational principles the reason why these small colonies felt the necessity to separate from the powerful Kingdom of England and the King of England. He explained their inherent desire for liberty, freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and he explained it in ways that were understandable to the people, to all of the people. A great deal of the reason for America's constant ability to self-improve is because we are able to reason, we're able to talk to each other, we're able to listen to each other, and we're able to analyze. We are able to apply our God-given common sense. So let's do it. Hello, it's Rudy Giuliani, back with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. And today we have two guests that are very special, and two guests that will give us a great deal of, I think, information that we might not be able to ordinarily get from people that are very, very close in government and politics. The first one is Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who's fairly new to the Congress, from Texas. He was a war hero, a Navy SEAL, lost the sight of one eye. But he's been remarkably articulate, remarkably visible, vocal, and constructive in his few years in the Congress, and has emerged, even at a young age, as I think he's 36, as a very, very positive leader for the present and for the future. So Dan's views on things are very much sought after, and he particularly is engaged in foreign policy, and his views on this epidemic, how it's being handled, how we can make the transition from shutdown to vibrant economy, which is like a gap that seems that you can't span it, but you can if you do it in the right way. And Dan has been one of the few that's been talking about that from the very beginning. Did not oppose the shutdown, saw it as necessary to stop what seemed to be an out-of-controllable, contagious virus, but also said from the very beginning, please do not mistake the fact that you pay a price for this. And the price that you pay is not just in dollars and the economy, but it's in human life. It's the people who are shut in, who are fragile. It's people who are shut in who can't handle it, either from an emotional or physical point of view. Your suicide calls have gone up, depression has gone up, other untoward behavior has increased, domestic violence. All of this is necessary to understand so that you don't carry on the shutdown for longer than is really necessary. There's a balance that has to be struck. Dan seems to be one of the few that has the courage to talk about it. He also has a pretty good understanding, because we're going to be talking about this now quite a bit more, about China's role in this. How accidental was it? How deliberate was it? And one thing it was for sure, it was crooked because they covered it up, even if it was an accident. And the covering up, I believe when we start counting it, could have cost millions of lives. Of course, to China, that doesn't matter. China is an atheist, communist regime with no regard for human life. This is the country that used to kill baby girls. And a couple million here, a couple million there, in a country that has 700 million people that are in dire poverty. There isn't the same, don't assume the same outlook on human life that you have as a member of Western civilization. Then we have Gina Loudon, and Gina Loudon is one of the more prominent women in our party, in the Republican Party. She is she's a co-chairman of Women for Trump. She's on the advisory board. She just concluded a fundraising meeting. Fundraising would normally be very, very hard during a time like this, although the president just set records for fundraising, and you know why. Because with all the criticism from the media about what a terrible job he's doing, he's not doing a terrible job, and honest people see it, and honest people see that the media is dishonest. They have no idea how much they're helping him. So the American people who don't have much money right now, go in and pull out $5 or $10 or 15 or 20 and send it to him. This was, I believe, 220 million, most of it in small dollars. Most of it to people saying, we know our president's doing a great job, and NBC, you're lying. That's what it is. Maybe it'll stop one of these days. So we'll talk about that with Gina, and we'll also talk a little bit about China with her, because she has some insights into that. And we'll talk about the presidential campaign. And, you know, we're starting to get pretty late into it now. And we've got one campaign that's being run out of the White House and is being run as a very severe government emergency of the worst kind. And the other is being run out of basement in, I don't know, was he in Delaware or... But wherever Joe is in a basement running his campaign and seeking a virtual Republican convention, a virtual Democratic convention, which would be really interesting contrast between the virtual candidate Biden and the real candidate Trump. And we'll see if the American people would like to have a virtual candidate for the first time ever. Should be an interesting show. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. First, there'll be Dan, and then there'll be Dr. Gina. We're on the air now with Dan Crenshaw, who is the United States Congressman from Texas, and this is Rudy Giuliani with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. We couldn't have a better guest than Dan Crenshaw. Dan Crenshaw is a relatively new member of the United States Congress, but one who's made an impression right away. He's a leader. He was a United States Navy SEAL. He's just written a book, Fortitude, which I highly recommend. And I just told Dan this book will have a long life because it's not one of these cheap political books. It's a book about fortitude and about things that you need to know in your life, not just if you're a Navy SEAL and a hero like he is. But Dan has really stepped in, and it's as if he's been in Congress, 20 years with the experience that he has and the background that he has. So it's a real honor for me to introduce him and to talk to him and ask him a couple of questions about this pandemic. Dan, welcome to Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for having me. Those compliments mean a lot coming from you.
Well, they're all watching your performance, and it's really been excellent. I know, Dan, you have spoken a bit, more than most of your colleagues, about the need to fight COVID-19, the worst pandemic, I guess, that we've had in our lifetime. But at the same time, the need to make sure that we start to bring our economy back as soon as practicable so we don't get more damage on one side than the other. So how do you see it now, and how do you see it coming back with the president putting this task force together now?
Yeah, I don't see any other option. We've been sort of living in this fantasy world where there's two options, these two binary choices of keeping the economy completely shut down or letting the pandemic spread or spread uncontrollably, let's say. And those aren't our only two options. We have to be able to do both. There are real consequences to the economy being shut down. I think America is fully aware of those consequences by this point. And I think people are ready to get back to work. The question is, how do we do that while also mitigating risk? And I would say that we have to think about it along three lines. One is our testing capacity. This is probably the place where we are most behind, but we are quickly catching up. And this isn't really anybody's fault. This is very difficult to produce the mass amounts of diagnostic tests. No other country has done that. Other countries have been able to test more on a per capita basis. But as far as the mass quantities we would need, nobody's been able to do that. As we get into these more shorter, easier tests to deliver, I think we get closer to that reality. But we can do tens of millions of serology tests, which are antibody tests. That's a good step as well. The second pillar that we need to be looking at is our public health capacity. Remember, what we've failed to do as leaders is tell people why we flatten the curve. It's not just to slow the spread. There's a reason we slow the spread. It is to allow our public health system to catch up and to make sure that it's not overwhelmed. It doesn't stop the spread. It never will. Remember, the area under the curve is the same. People need to understand that. You're not going to stamp this out. It's a global pandemic, but you can live with it. And you live with it by making sure we have enough ICU beds and enough ventilators, which we have ramped up production massively. We probably have way more than we'll ever need at this point, which is a good thing. So we're good on that front. And then the third thing is public education and tactics at the ground level. So what does that mean? In practical terms, it means staying 6 feet away from each other, but also getting back to work. It means wearing a mask. That's the new normal. It means don't touch anybody. It means, hey, maybe we have restaurants open, but there's less people in the restaurants. Okay, maybe we're still not doing big concerts, but maybe we can do televised concerts and televised sports games. There's a new normal that will occur until there's a vaccine, but that new normal doesn't mean we have to devastate our economy either.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's a way to come back a step at a time, but still in a very determined way. That's kind of what I tried to do on September 11. We didn't come back all in one night. Broadway came back in 2 days, and there was nobody at the Broadway shows. By the next week, people came to the Broadway shows. They had to see the first 4 or 5 people come, see them safe, and then people got back into it. And I think that's what will happen here. The other thing that I'm really concerned about, and I hadn't been at the beginning because, this hits you as a surprise, and I can understand all the leaders, Republican, Democrat, being somewhat taken aback by this because you didn't expect it at this level. But the Chinese role in this now seems to be very, very questionable. They either made a terrible mistake, which they hid, which is this person ate a bat, and it turns out that there are no bats sold at that market, and the original person was not infected in that way. We don't know how. Or there was some terrible accident that occurred at the laboratory that was just a mile or 2 away, where they were experimenting with bats for years and trying to do, well, it could be weaponizing some of their capacity. It could have been an accident there, which they were covering up. It could have been something deliberate there that they're covering up. But the fact that they're covering up raises all these possibilities. So what do you think our obligation is in trying to sort this out, particularly going forward in our relationships with China?
Well, let's settle on the things that we know for sure, which is that they covered it up and they withheld information. That's out of all those options, those are the only things we know for absolutely sure. How the disease spread, whether it came from the lab and whether that was deliberate, is open for question. I tend not to believe that they deliberately let loose the virus because it obviously I don't see any benefits for China there in the long term. But Glenn Beck put out a video that he got from Chinese TV that was showing scientists taking samples from bats and then bringing them in to study the viruses. So it's very obvious that this happens in those labs, and there's a decent chance that is how it got out. Whether that was intentional is another question. But let's just focus on the facts. They definitely withheld it. We know now in hindsight that they put out false propaganda and let people travel out of Wuhan, 5 million people, when they really should not have, and they knew better. So what are the consequences for that? Well, that's where we get into the technicalities. I think there's plenty of political will to make sure that they pay those consequences. The question will be, how do we make them pay without doing extra damage to ourselves? I mean, that's always the question, frankly, with respect to China, whether it's with regard to trade or intellectual property theft or investments or whatever it is. And this is a time for a lot of smart people to get together and start throwing around those ideas. And that is happening on a broad scale. Maybe there's not new ideas needed. Maybe it's some of these old ideas that we just need to dust off and actually implement, such as better American investment abroad to compete with the Chinese. They're trying to take over the world, whether it's buying up ports or their Belt and Road Initiative. Why? And on the conservative side of the aisle, we keep fighting amongst each other on whether or not American investment should or whether or not American tax dollars should promote investment for American corporations. We need to have that conversation with our libertarian friends who generally oppose that. We need to look at intellectual property theft at our universities and the Confucius Institutes that the Chinese have put here. These are old problems that we haven't really dealt with effectively. And then, one bill that I plan on proposing is a bill that would allow the president the power to not only stop UN officials who have been involved in terrorism to come to New York City and be at the United Nations, but also officials who were engaged in propaganda. And that would directly target those Chinese officials who were actively participating in propaganda to say that the U.S. was at fault, or to say that China didn't originate this virus, and that they didn't hide anything. The propaganda that really cost lives globally. So there are a lot of good people, I think, looking for these kind of solutions that we can use against the Chinese propaganda machine.
As you look at the world, Congressman, and you do in a broad way, I would think there are only two possible real competitors to the United States. One of them is Russia, and Russia is too small, too many problems. They have 1/10 of our budget. And China, which is half our budget and unlimited resources and people. And China is the one who has the desire to be our competitor. It seems to me that the Democratic Party ignores that. Joe Biden has announced on several very embarrassing occasions, but still said it, that China is not really a competitor.
Well, the Democratic Party is very opportunistic. They've never operated off of a set of principles, and so their opinion will change based on what our opinion is as conservatives. I think that has held true for a very long time, especially with respect to foreign policy. There isn't a set of guidelines that help inform their decision making or policy making. And so that's why you're seeing the flip flop on things like China and Russia. On the one hand, Barack Obama will say that Russia's, hey, go back to the Soviet era, or if you're concerned about Russia, or what did he say? The Cold War called. They want their policy back, and then all of a sudden, Russia's the big deal again. It's total political opportunism. The reality is, China is indeed a competitor and an adversary, and an increasingly bad actor on the world stage. I think for a long time, the American way was to hope that China would change and develop into a responsible global partner, and that has turned out to be not true. It's just not true, and it's time to accept that. And it sucks. I wish it were true, because they would make a great global partner. They really would, but they don't, and that's just the truth. With Russia, they're just powerful enough to be a nuisance. They are declining power, and they act like it. For reasons that frankly I think confuse a lot of us with Western states of mind, because again, most of these countries have the potential to be good, responsible global partners. It's just a matter of choice, but their interests are simply different, and these are realities that we have to accept.
So, Congressman, how do you see the way in which this pandemic, which of course is mostly and mainly a tragedy, but we are in a political year, it is going to have a political effect. There's no way this pandemic isn't going to reflect itself in November at the ballot box. How do you see the politics of this playing out?
Well, it's a little too early to tell. The media is trying their hardest to make this seem like a massive failure on the part of the Trump administration. And I think objectively, that just isn't true. Objectively, you can't look back in time and say a different administration would have done anything differently or been differently prepared. Well, actually, except in one case. We know for a fact that a Biden administration or a Pelosi administration never would have restricted travel from China on January 31st. We know this because they've said so. So that on that respect, they should lose. But I think their behavior has been abhorrent. I don't. Again, I wrote this entire book about outrage culture and the need for us to look into the facts unemotionally, and we are failing to do that. Our media is certainly failing to do that, and they're doing so to attempt to sway public opinion, and with 2020 elections in mind. And frankly, I think it's deplorable. It's despicable. It shouldn't be done in a time of crisis.
And do you think it's having effect?
It might be. I'd have to look at polling. It does seem like the approval ratings have gone down after 2 weeks of nonstop barrage from the media against the president. claiming that he's killing people, claiming that, he hits Trump's virus. I mean, these things do start to have an effect on people. Now, you're really targeting a very select part of the population, because the reality is that Democrats and Republicans are going to vote their way. And so you're really looking at the moderate voters who are swing voters, and it's a very tiny slice of the pie, and it's hard to say where they go right now.
Yeah, it is hard to say, and the election is, believe it or not, a long time away, although people don't realize that a lot's going to happen between now and then. And it's hard to believe this, but they could be voting on something different. I remember when I ran in 2007, in the primary, it was all about the war on terror. And we were all campaigning on who had the best plan, who had the best surge. All of a sudden, domestic crisis, everybody voted on the economy. So you never know. But I do think the president has done the fundamentals correctly. And they have not produced a counter to him. They have not produced someone who can. And Joe Biden seems like he has more questions than he has answers. So we'll see what happens. But Dan, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule. Your contribution is really very, very important and very vital right now. You see things in a very clear and common sense way, and that's a little unusual in Washington. Maybe not in Texas, but in Washington. So I hope to see you very soon, Dan. And stay healthy. And your family, everybody okay, I take it? Everyone in the
Everybody's
family?
okay.
Good.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Everybody's okay. Just praying for the rest of America.
God bless you.
And hey, everybody, while you're in quarantine, make sure you read my book, okay?
I will. I read the first 2 chapters, and you have to read the rest after you read the first 2 chapters. Take care.
Oh, good. Thanks.
And now we will take a short break. Hi, this is Rudy Giuliani, back with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. And we have an exceptional guest for you. She's a leader in the Republican Party. She's someone who is part of the advisory committee for re-electing President Trump, and she played a very large role in electing President Trump in the first place and as one of his important advisors. She is the co-chairman of Women for Trump, which is a very important organization because a lot of people would like you to think that no women support Trump, which I think Gina and her colleagues make a very, very good case is not true. And she just happens to be one of the most knowledgeable people in Washington and in the United States. So it's a great honor to have her with us.
Thank you. Honored to be with you, Mayor.
It's an honor to have you with us. You just finished a meeting of the fundraising committee for the Trump campaign. So with the terrible job that he's doing, running this whole COVID thing, the New York Times says he's doing awful, and the Washington Post says he's doing terrible, and NBC and CBS and ABC think he's playing golf secretly. I mean, he can't be raising any money, right? He's not raising any money.
The nice thing is, Rudy, that what matters is what the people say. And the people actually have a different opinion than all of those others. And the people say that he's doing a great job. And that's why he has more donations, more small donations than ever before. And that's why he's continuing to raise record-setting money at a record-setting pace. And I want to add to that, as one of the national co-chairs of Women for Trump, I want to add to that his donations with women have more than doubled since 2016. And these, again, are many small donations. And I think that says a lot because people can't necessarily afford to do a lot right now. But what they can do, they are doing, because they know one thing. If there were anyone sitting in that Oval Office making decisions while they use this crisis as an excuse, Rudy, to chisel away at our liberties that are in our Constitution, if there were anyone sitting there besides Donald J. Trump, we would not have an America to go back to. You know it, I know it, and the American people know it, and they are not going to take a chance that he's not reelected in November.
You know, you had a major test back in January between the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, and the Democrats, and that is what to do about China. There's no question the Democrats would have kept us open to hundreds of thousands of Chinese continuing to come in because China was deliberately sending 1.5 million out of Wuhan. And a lot of them are going to be headed to the U.S. Unlike Italy, we saw what happened to Italy. Spain, we saw what happened to Spain. Donald Trump said, no, you're not coming into the United States. He cut it down. Response to the Democratic Party, xenophobe by Biden, fascist by Pelosi, inhumane. They wanted to take him to the World Court. They would have let them in. And whatever the numbers are, which seem to be far less than people thought they were going to be, but whatever they are, they'd have been triple. So he literally saved lives that Democrats could not save.
Right, and you and I know, in the words of Margaret Thatcher, which I'm getting ready to botch terribly, something along the lines of when they start calling you names, it's because they have no arguments left against you. That's what the left always does with this president, is proceeds to call him names because they have no arguments against him, Rudy, because this president, from day one, in his promises made, promises kept ways, he was starting to bring manufacturing back to America. What if he hadn't done that? Rudy, where would we have been if this president hadn't already brought millions of jobs back to this country from China? Where would we have been? Where would we have been if this president hadn't already begun the process of closing our borders in the ways that no president, Republican or Democrat, before him had the guts and the chutzpah to do, except for Donald J. Trump? Where would we have been? This president had a vision for this moment before he was ever confronted with this moment. And that's why he went about the business of closing down things with China. And that's why the left went crazy and started the name calling that they always do when he's doing the right thing. When the left starts calling him names, Rudy, you can know the president is on the right path every single time.
I think that's absolutely right, Gina. You know, you got another contrast because before I got into this, I spent a lot of time investigating Joe Biden. And believe me, it's not going to go to waste. But China has a very strange relationship with the Biden family.
Oh, yes.
They made the Biden family wealthy. Joe Biden brought his son Hunter over to China. He lost his negotiations on getting China out of the islands that threatened Japan. He just completely got his backside whipped by China. But then 8 days later, his son got $1 billion check from China. And his son, the son of the vice president, was a partner with the Bank of China.
Right.
Now, you think that guy can negotiate tough and strong ever? No. But when he's got $1.5 billion, he might even get tougher. So, I mean, that's a disgrace, what Biden did.
Yeah, well, let's reverse all this and pretend it was Don Jr. I mean, or Eric Trump or any of the Trump children, and imagine the crazy, the frenzy, the media feeding fest that they would have had if the situation were reversed. And yet you have virtual media silence on this. And let's also not forget, this was all at taxpayer expense. This was on Air Force One, right. Air Force Two, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And but none of this is ever mentioned or exposed in the media, but it will be. We could not have a better candidate to run against than Joe Biden. This is literally the dream of the Republicans. We've been sitting back and watching this while the media doesn't know what to do because their best friends, the Democrats, have played right into the hands of Republicans while we are fundraising like crazy. And Joe Biden is sitting around watching his washing machine, hoping it'll tell him that he's the next nominee of the Democrat Party. I mean, the man needs to be in an assisted living situation where someone can take care of him. And I mean this in the most respectful, sensitive way, but I mean, this is elder abuse at this point, and you and I know it, and the Democrats know it at this point. So look for them to pull something sneaky because they have no intention of letting this frail skeleton of a man with a diminished brain capacity be their actual nominee for president. I just don't see it.
Gina, I think I'm going to invite him on for a guest and see how often he gets my name right.
Yeah. Ruby. I can think of a million
Ralph,
things he'll call you.
Ralph. Randolph.
Exactly.
No, but it really is. It's a function of how much they hate him. All of this is a function of how much they hate him. The first investigation, the second investigation, the Ukraine investigation, the stupid impeachment, and now this thing. Every single one of them, when you look at it carefully, he didn't do anything wrong. But they try to create that impression with the American people. And I really do think they've cried wolf one too many times, and it's not going to work. But
well, yes, the American people have seen through it every single time, Mr. Mayor. Don't forget that. And it's really not about how much they hate him. Remember, they loved him. You look back at articles. I was looking at something the other day. I Googled something about Ivanka. I was looking for something, and I saw this beautiful article written about Ivanka, and I thought, what? You know, it's some typical fashion magazine or something. And I thought, they wrote a nice article about Ivanka. Wait, what's wrong here? And then I realized, of course, it was just exactly like 4 years old. And I thought, oh, of course, because she was a fashion icon 4 years ago before the president was elected, right? And they could still write nice things about the Trump family. It's not the Trump family that they hate. It's us that they hate. It's our liberty that they hate. And they only hate them because it's a way to hurt us. So never forget that, because if the Trump family were gone today and we ever let them actually take them down, they would just come after us a different way and our liberties.
You know, Gina, that's a very, very good point. If Donald Trump had run as a Democrat, it might have been a wholly different situation for him.
Yeah. Yeah, if he had run as a Democrat, they'd be heralding him and how great he was.
He'd be the greatest president since FDR.
That's exactly
and
right.
I knew that when I was mayor. I ran as a Republican. I turned the city around in 4 years.
Yes, you
did. I reduced crime by 40% in 4 years, eventually 60. Changed welfare by 1 million, on and on and on and on. The New York Times wrote this editorial like, well, you have no choice but to vote for him. Had I been a Democrat, they'd have said I was the greatest mayor since LaGuardia. I had no doubt about it. But, you know, you get used to it. I think that's why we fight better than they do. You can't beat him. You can't beat him. You can't beat Trump in a fight. I'm telling you, you can't beat him.
But you know, the other thing about you, Mr. Mayor, that you have so much in common with our president is that they can't control you. See, they want to know that you're just going to hand out city contracts to them because they can pay you off. They want to know that business is going to happen the way it used to happen. And as somebody who's been inside politics, remember, I'm married to a former state senator, and so I've seen it enough on a firsthand, in a firsthand way that I know that what it really is about is them being able to control you. And the media is part of that whole circuit, and they like the way things worked before. And this is on both sides of the aisle, by the way. This is why we see the rhinos and the never Trumpers and the people that come out against the president that are sometimes from our own side of the aisle. And they did this to you too, Rudy, and this is why you know and relate so well to the deep state that's trying to destroy this president, because it's the same people. On a lesser scale, I went through this. I never thought it could be worse. And then I look at it with Trump and I say, oh my God, I got nothing. I was like Mickey Mouse compared to what he goes through. But it's remarkable that he handles it. It's also, he's got the most loyal supporters, not just you and me, but millions of them. Because I think real people who talk straight English, right, tell things like they are, just respect him. They respect him. They say, I got a real person there as a president, and he's fighting for me. So how does the campaign look? You get a good chance to see the inside of it. How does it look? Does it look enthusiastic and strong, and even with all this distraction? It looks fantastic. You know, the president, I believe, is always in his element when he has a fight, and you've known him a lot longer than I have, Mr. Mayor, and you know that he is a scrapper, and the bigger the fight, the better he shows up. And so I have no doubt that this president, he would be winning no matter who his opponent was, but given that it might actually be Joe Biden at this point. But, you know, this is the thing. We're going to fight like we have the strongest, most mentally fit, most physically fit opponent that we could possibly have, because we have every intention of winning no matter what possible pivots this race could take. And we're going to be prepared in every way, shape, and form. And we plan to come out totally victorious because we know that this president's second term is going to continue what he built in the first term. And it's going to mean all the difference to the future of America. And we know that without his second term, he can't complete what he started in the first term. And especially now that the Democrats have shown they are literally willing, and we knew this, we knew it, but we hadn't really seen it like they've shown it now with this whole COVID-19 thing. They are literally willing to sacrifice American lives to win more power for themselves. And Americans need to let that sink in. We will not be treated like children. We will not be a socialist nation. And we will not let anyone except Donald Trump be president in 2020. And I think that's the way most Americans feel. I think we'll be shocked with the margin of victory in 2020 for Donald Trump.
I think you're really correct. And I think this COVID epidemic proves it more than anything else. When the president some weeks back talked about several efficacious medicines like remdesivir and hydroxychloroquine, medicines that are 50 years old that have very known but fairly benign side effects, they all went crazy. And now we find out that most of the doctors have been prescribing it from the very beginning. A study came out in France that showed that it was enormously effective. But they don't even have the grace to apologize. And they were depriving people. Actually, some governors put in a ban against this medicine. They were depriving people of a medicine that has a chance to save their lungs. It's terrible. But hopefully the American people, as you say, will see that. And a lot of that will have to do with you, Gina, because you're one of the best. You're one of the best advocates that we have. And I really, really congratulate you. And how is your family? You have a beautiful family. Are they all healthy?
Thank you. Everyone is healthy. I have 5 beautiful children, one by the blessing of adoption that happens to have Down syndrome, and we're super proud of him. I'm a big adoption advocate, especially special needs adoption. I always like to get that plug in. And we're all doing well. And we're big fans of you, Mayor. We appreciate your long-term loyalty and friendship to our president. Loyal friends to him means so much to me. When I watch some people around him who I feel like they aren't loyal, I'm so thankful that I know he has go-to friends like you that he can count on. And I love his family for the same reason, for their loyalty. And so I'm just thankful for friends like you that have been there for him for decades, and I know will be there for decades to come.
And I am with you, and God bless your family. And we'll see you very soon,
Yours
Gina.
too. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for
be
having
healthy
me.
and safe. Okay?
You do the same.
Right. Thank you, Gina.
God bless.
God bless you. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening to today's podcast. I think it was a good combination of 2 guests. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, a real bright light of our party, and not just for the future. He's a bright light for our party right now. He says some of the things people don't say. And Gina Loudon, who I remember from the last campaign, one of the key people to elect Donald Trump, one of the people that trusts him and understands him the most, and one of the people that can make the points about how he affects women and is just as good for women as he is for men in terms of the kind of America that he produces. So I was very thankful to both of them, because they're both very busy, for coming on and giving us this sort of update on what is now somewhat of a subterranean campaign. We'll be back soon with other interesting guests, and I look forward to seeing you. This is Rudy Giuliani with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense.